Hi there. Let me make it clear, this video is pure speculation, wish list speculation. This isn't really going to happen, but I was thinking on that eventually House of the Dragon will need to cast this prominent street preacher character in Rabble-Rouser called the Shepherd. I mean, he will definitely appear in the show at some point. He's a major character. Thematically resonant with the faith militant in Game of Thrones, and they even think he was a member of that or something. Quite separately from this, I was thinking, George R. R. Martin isn't going to live forever, and all he was saying about with the writer's strike of all the time he spent writing for Beauty and the Beast in the early 90s, around late 80s, early 90s, and I'm thinking, it'll be so nice if Ron Perlman could have, like, a cameo minor recurring role in a Westeros project while Martin is still alive. Now, they're having multiple projects, so maybe not House of the Dragon, maybe something in Dunk and Egg, in the Targaryen Conquest. There's a couple of things. It'd be nice to work in Ron Perlman again for something, Just as a side thing to be nice, because they work together so much. And the thought occurred to me, just crossing those two things together, I think it would be a nice fit if Ron Perlman was cast as the Shepherd for a later season of House of the Dragon. I don't think this will even be in Season 2. This is like Season 3 is when the Shepherd would show up. Or they start mentioning it, but that would be really fun. Because the Shepherd is this raving street preacher who starts rabble-rousing amongst all of the poor and commoners of Flea Bottom and everything who are starving from all of the blockades. And yes, this is, the history rhymes. It's thematically resonant with how, as Cersei and the Lannisters basically let the realm fall to pieces with this let-em-eat-cake attitude, it leads to the rise of the Sparrows, which turn into the revived Faith Militant. It's similar to that. If you just watched Game of Thrones, it was Jonathan Pryce plays their leader, who's actually kind of an austere, but not raving lunatic, but in the more the austere leadership kind of walking barefoot, hair shirt kind of way, but dignified. I think even in the books, the Shepherd is not that, but he is a half-mad prophet. He shouts more than the High Sparrow does. And they don't know anything about his backstory. He's a mystery in universe. He's missing one hand, that they wonder if did he lose a hand for being a thief or not, but that could have been anything. And there's this big theory in the books that he might have been a surviving Faith Militant. Well, specifically their lower order, the Poor Fellows. But they got disbanded 80 years before this. And it just mentions that, because Martin wrote these out of order, in the first prequel novella for The Princess and the Queen and stuff, it mentions the Shepherd. Some thought he was a Faith Militant, but the Faith Militant were disbanded after Jaehaerys, the old king that you see at the beginning of the prologue, who ruled for 55 years, his evil uncle Maegor fought a war against the Faith Militant, who were rebelling against Targaryens because of all their incest and stuff. And when Jaehaerys finally overthrew his evil uncle Maegor, the war ended and he offered an amnesty. And he offered generous terms. He said, we won't prosecute anyone for fighting the Targaryens. Just, you don't have to like it, but just accept that the Valyrians are different. That we already have an incestuous bloodline. We can't change that. We're not going to stop. An unspoken gentleman's agreement that they wouldn't do polygamy again. Which is why Viserys is so upset every time Daemon, on like 2 occasions, says, well, I can just take 2 wives. That it was an unspoken agreement with the faith that we wouldn't do that. Otherwise, it would spark another rebellion. And that's a whole other prequel era unto itself, that the reign of Maegor is the Faith Militant Uprising era. It's the major war. And protracted insurgency. But I think Martin clarified pretty well, because he was writing out of order. He wrote all that by like 2012. In 2018's Fire and Blood, he said, I'm going to make some linker chapters for the reign of Jaehaerys, from the end of Maegor, the end of the Faith Militant Uprising, through the beginning of Viserys' reign, and what led to the Great Council that led them being there. He wrote some new chapters around 2018 of the early years of Jaehaerys' reign, where he shows that the Faith Militant didn't just shut off like a switch, even when the new High Septon told them to peacefully disband for amnesty. They wound down over a couple of years, most prominently that there was this failed assassination attempt on Queen Alysanne at a bathhouse while she was pregnant with her first child, like the early years of their reign, by these septas who were former faith militant. But he showed that in linker chapters that it didn't turn off overnight. And he clarified in some other added lines that when they get to talking about the shepherd, this mad, crazy, raving street preacher who rallies the mobs in King's Landing, that, well, how could he be a poor fellow, a faith militant? The in-universe historian does say, well, Munkin does say that, well, obviously he probably wasn't like 100 years old, but the order survived underground for a while, like preaching in the back roads of the kingdom, in the forests and stuff, that just, it tapered off through history. It's always fascinating, like, because I'm a medieval history major, when you have heretical movements, they didn't write down what they were doing. And sometimes they continued for a really long time, underground, as it were. And eventually they taper off. Sometimes a new rebellion would happen somewhere. And when they debate, well, is this heretical movement in England a continuation of the one in Hungary, or did they just rebel for similar reasons, but they were independent of each other? We don't know, because the record isn't there. But, I mean, the shepherd made no secret he hated the Targaryens, but he never claimed to be a former faith militant. But the in-universe historian says maybe he wasn't like this 100-year-old, 120-year-old guy. He couldn't have been. It was 80 years since they were disbanded, but the order as a whole was underground, and like he could be the grandson, well, the student of, I'm thinking of Jedi Masters, from Master to Apprentice, that rule of two and all that they went underground, and okay, maybe whatever order of wandering monks he was part of was former faith militant who were just in the backwaters, trained someone else who in turn trained him. So he's the remnant of the faith militant. Could have happened. That in-universe Munkin says he could plausibly have been the surviving ember of that, even if he wasn't alive when they were officially disbanded. Plausibly. And then there's other characters who are also, at different points much later, preaching against the Targaryens, and they go, I think that guy was another faith militant. But he never claimed to be, so we don't know. What also brings this to mind, bringing it all together, and why I'm making this video, is today we got really big leaks, prominent leaks from filming in Caceres, that they're going to have food riots in Flea Bottom, and, well, people yelling at Alicent and Helena and the Greens that we don't care about your war, we are starving from the blockade that you haven't been able to lift. That it echoes what happened in the War of the Five Kings. This wasn't in the book specifically. They do mention Aegon and the Greens were having increasingly bad hold over the city because of all the blockades and food shortages. And there were problems even later, after the tide of war changed, that King's Landing was suffering. The commoners don't care. That if you're raising taxes, what affects them is what matters on the ground. That there were still food shortages and price shortages and high taxes. That given how prominently they are setting up the anger of the commoners, even in Season 2, with these invented scenes of food riots, you think they're going to start introducing the shepherd sooner instead of later. Maybe not in Season 2, but showing, like Game of Thrones Season 2 showed the conditions of the suffering of the commoners that led to Jonathan Pryce's High Sparrow coming in Season 5. They're laying the groundwork for that. And regardless, one way or another, it's a big enough of a character. The shepherd will be coming in Season 3 or so. And I was just thinking to myself, it would be really nice if he was Ron Perlman. Because Ron Perlman has played, like, imposing priest and monk characters before. I mean, he was in The Name of the Rose as the heretic hunchback. Penitenze agite! Penitenze agite! And so forth. He was very young then. But then all these other things he's done, most recently he did this sci-fi movie that didn't really take off. John Malkovich was in it, where he was playing also like this Warhammer-esque priest. that I think I'm just showing you screenshots of this. I think Ron Perlman can play an imposing street preacher, that stereotype of the imposing street preacher railing against those in power. And even though he's an older man now, Ron Perlman, I think he still has that presence that he could be the shepherd. So this video has been pure speculation, just this fan wish listing. If we know the shepherd is coming, who are your shortlists for him? Because he is cut of a similar cloth, man of the cloth, to the High Sparrow, but Jonathan Pryce, he's different from the book version, Jonathan Pryce, but obviously the show is going to hell by season 5, but even then, you get the sense he's a little more dignified than the shepherd is a product of the mob. There's some people who suspect he wasn't even really a faith militant, but just some thief who got lost his hand and just went insane and pretended to be a faith militant. We'll never know. But he's got a bit more of a edge of the mob to him, whereas the High Sparrow's people we're going to storm the churches and throw down all the money changers, that type of thing. The shepherd is more of the angry mob with pitchforks and torches stringing people up from lampposts type of religious popular revolt. It's a little seedier there. So just, who are your shortlist for who should play the shepherd? Because if I had to pick someone, I'd kind of like them to consider Ron Perlman. But that's just me. I hope you can appreciate that. So please like and subscribe. I don't normally do speculation. Just all these things in the news today hit me of, I'd like to see that.